Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to start creating the paddle for our Breakout game, and we're going to start scripting it to move. So let's dive right in. Here in our hierarchy, we need to create a sprite that's going to be the paddle that will be our player. So one real quick way is to click on this plus button, and then go to 2D Object and Sprite. So it's looking like nothing came up, but here in the hierarchy we can see we have a new sprite. Go ahead and click on that. We need to give it something to display. So here in the inspector, under the sprite renderer component, there's a channel for the sprite. Right now it says none. That's why nothing is showing up here in the scene view. If we click on that little target next to it, we get a dialog box. And I just want to choose this UI sprite just to get something showing in here. I can double click on that to apply that. And then with my scale tool up here on the toolbox, I can make that bigger. And now I can start to see something show up. And so this is going to be our paddle for right now. I want to rename this sprite. So I'm going to come up, click on its name. It'll highlight automatically for us. I can just call this paddle. And now I want to start creating a script for this. So down here in my project window, in that blank space, I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to create, and then C# script. Now be very careful as you create these scripts. When you create a script, so I'm going to click on this. We're in the middle of creating the script at this point. It's making a file, and we're going to give it a name. It's already highlighted, so don't click off, don't press enter. You want to immediately type in a name before you click off, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So we're going to call this our player controller. This is all one word, and we're capitalizing each new word. This is a scripting naming convention. It's similar to camel case, but we start with a capital letter as well. So once you have a name typed in there, then you can press enter. And just here in the inspector, you can see that the name player controller, the file name, ends up here in the class name. So this should have some collections and libraries here at the top using system.collections, using Unity Engine, and then the first and then to define the class, we're saying that it's a public class player controller. This class name again has to match the file name. If those don't match, then Unity doesn't like it and your script is not going to work. So make sure that class name and file name match exactly. Then we can go and let's assign this to our paddle. So I'm going to select my paddle in the hierarchy, and one way to do this is just drag and drop from the project into the bottom of the inspector. Now if your file name and your class name don't match, this is not going to happen. So make sure those match if something is not going right at this point. And so now I can start to edit this script. I'm going to go to this component, the player controller script component, all the way over here to the right, those three little dots, and I'm going to say edit script. You can also double click the script here in the component, or you can double click it from the project window. Either way, we're going to open up Visual Studio and start to edit the script. All right, so we're going to type in a line of code here in the update function. So update is a function that gets called once per frame, like this comment says. That means for every frame of the game that happens, stuff in this function takes place. So we're going to type in the word transform with a lowercase t. As you start typing in, it should try to autocomplete for you. Notice that there is a capital T transform and a lowercase t transform. We are using the lowercase t. This transform, if I double click on this, it'll finish it out for me. This transform is a reference to the transform component of the object. And so we're just going to get this moving. So I'm going to say transform dot. I'm going to translate, so translate, and come down. I can also press return to finish that out for me. And then I'm going to open parentheses. This is giving me a little tooltip. So these tooltips are super helpful if you don't quite understand what's happening. Translate is a function that moves the transform in the direction and distance of translation. It's telling us inside of these parentheses that it needs a vector 3 for the translation. So a vector 3 is just like an x, y, and z. So I'm just going to type that in. So x, comma, y, comma, z. This is not actually going to work right now. This is a pseudo code, and we use it just to kind of plan out our code. Every line of code in C# needs to end with a semicolon, so I'm going to end with that. And if you start getting, if you're typing this along and you start getting red lines underneath, that's okay for right now. We're probably going to have some errors as we go. And so this translate needs an x, y, and a z value to go with our x, y, and z values here in the inspector. And so I'm going to change those values from x, y, and z to, I'm going to give something, say like, I'm just going to say 1f for my x, and then 0f for my y, and same thing, 0f for my z. I need to save this script. I can tell that I need to save because on my tab here, there's a little circle right there. And if I go File, Save, then that just turns into an X. So if I have changes to be made, see how that changes to a circle. Then if I save again, that changes back to that X. Let me go back to Unity. It's going to compile some of those scripts, make sure I don't have any errors. And let's just see what happens. Up here in the top in the middle, there's a play button that's going to play our game. And now, shoom, there goes our paddle. If you look in the inspector, that number just keeps going up and up and up. It is infinitely going to the right. And as of right now, we have no way to get it back except for exiting play mode. So click on that play button again. So what can we do with that? As of right now, not a whole lot. This could be useful for like, later if you're doing some kind of like a space shooter game or any game where you're shooting a projectile. This script is really good for that. You just want it to go in a direction forever and ever until it hits something, and that there's extra code for that. So first, let's add another layer of coding on top of this to get some of the behavior that we want. So I'm going to go before this line. I'm going to press enter a couple times. And we're going to start to try to get some input from the player. So when they press, say, like the left arrow, the right arrow, or like WASD, then we can have our game react to that. So we're going to use an if statement. So the way these are set up, you type in the word if, you have parentheses. In these parentheses, you have a condition. This is again pseudocode. This isn't going to work as it is. And then if that condition is true, then inside of curly brackets, you can run some code. So the condition that we're looking for is if the player presses a specific button. And to do that with Unity, we say if input dot get key and then the way this works is in parentheses again, so we have two sets of parentheses. Inside of the get key parentheses, we say key code, and then dot, and then what button we want to press. For this, I want to use the left and right arrows, so I can start typing in left, and we'll say left arrow. And then we can take that line, and I'm just going to select it all, and then cut, Command X, Control X, and then paste, Command or Control V, and put that in here. So I'm going to save that, come back to Unity. We'll test this out again. This is going to be a little unintuitive because if we press left, then it's going to go right. And so whenever I press that button down, that's when it moves. And so for your challenge, I want you to first exit play mode, go back to your code, and see if you can write another if statement to make it move when you press the right arrow. So you'll have two if statements. So pause the video, go write another if statement, and come back and we'll continue on what we're doing. Alright, hopefully you figured that out pretty quick. It's just another if statement. The condition is input.getKey and then key code right arrow, and I just used the exact same line of code from before. And so now if I save that, I go and check this out. Now if I press left arrow, it moves. If I press right arrow, it also moves. So either button I press, it moves to the right. That's weird, right? So we can fix that really, really quick by just saying on this left arrow one, if we make that first number negative, so we put a minus in front of that, and then that fixes our problem there. The next thing that we're going to have to implement is these numbers are what's called hard-coded. That means anytime you want to make a change, you have to go in and you have to go into your code and change these numbers, and that's not the best practice. The best practice is to use a variable. So what is a variable? Well, you can think of a variable as a box. So a box is just a container that you put stuff in. When it comes to coding, our variables have to have a name. Something you might be familiar with is something like hit points. And then you have a value of hit points, say like 100, and that value gets assigned into that box. And then as you play the game, that value of hit points can change. So as you play the game, if you get hit by something, your hit points would go down. If you collect some kind of healing item, your hit points would go back up. And then once you have 0 hit points, you die. And then you have to either respawn or start a new life or just kind of whatever, depending on the game that you're playing. And so different types of boxes, different types of variables can take different things. So just like a cardboard box, you could put a whole lot of different things in it. But like mail goes inside a mailbox, treasure goes inside a treasure box. The same idea applies to variables. There are specific variables that only take specific types of data, and we'll encounter that soon enough. So back to our script, we need to replace this value with a variable. So here at the top, let's give ourselves some space. We're going to make a float variable, so we'll type in float, and then we're going to give it a name. You want to name your variables based on kind of what purpose they're going to serve. So this variable will control how fast our paddle can go back and forth. So speed is a really good name for this variable. And then we're going to assign a value right away here, and we'll just call this 1f. Because it's a float value, we have to add this f just to be all nice and kosher. And then we'll go and replace the value here with the variable name speed. So we'll change those 1f's to speed. We're still going to keep the left arrow if statement negative and the right arrow if statement positive, so it'll still go left and right based on that. And then one more thing before we go to the editor is I want to be able to adjust this value in the Unity editor. And one way to do that is before that word float, use the keyword public, and that will allow it to show up in the Unity editor. So save your script and switch back over to Unity, and then you'll see that speed value show up in the player controller component of the paddle. So let's go into play mode and kind of test this out. So it should still be behaving exactly like it was last time, and this is going really, really fast, even at just 1. So we can drop that down while we're playing. We come over here, and you can type in like, okay, let's try 0.5, and then come click on the game view and try it again. That's still a little quick. We'll cut that in half again, so 0.25, and that feels a little bit better. We can always change this kind of whenever because it's a variable. One thing to note is that as you make changes here in play mode, when you exit play mode, it goes back to the state of the game before you hit play. So right now it's set to 0.25. When I exit play mode, it's going to jump back to 1, and so I have to go and make that change again. So go ahead and save your scene. And that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to set up our play area and limit how far right and left that our paddle can move. So join me then.